Very good. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for allowing me the chance to speak. I'm a rank and file member of the Erotic Service Providers Union.
Okay, could you give us, well, if you don't want to give us your name,
I
you
can
don't
name
have
myself
to.
as Jane Doe because I'm also
That's fine.
what they've termed today as survivor leader. So I think I'm only the second survivor who's spoken today. I was actually assaulted by a violent predator 3 years ago. And after that, I survived an assault by the system. Prostitution itself never made me a victim. That's not something I learned through some kind of brainwashing. It's something I feel to be the truth. But the law actually did embolden the criminal who violated me. Then it weakened the prosecution of that violent crime. And I can explain the details about that if you'd like another time.
It's not necessary now.
Also, I faced discrimination from the nonprofit counselors and victims compensation program. What we need is a meaningful grievance process and expedient accountability process for nonprofits providing services. You guys are all talking about making victims whole, yet there's only 2 of us present, and one of them was victimized 20 years ago or something. The service providers should be accountable. I was placed into what's a conversion therapy, which is basically based on this idea that we've been pre-brainwashed, and so now we're stuck in this wrong thinking. I was assaulted, and I'm an adult. I don't really need this kind of paternalistic attitude applied to me just because I may or may have not actually traded sex before I turned 18. Basically, money's being sent on arresting adults doing consensual activity. I have a couple FBI stats. There's over 10,000 people arrested for prostitution in California in 2013, for example. The same year, we had 9,714 documented rapes. Only 16.5% resulted in an arrest, even. The system is failing to keep the public safe. It's in fact hurting people. And yeah, so that's my relevant points. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your heartfelt testimony.
Yeah, and I hope you will get back in touch with me because I have actually reached
Well,
out
talk to Tomasa right there, and let's get more details. If I have some time after this meeting, I'll sit with you as well.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Phil Ludwig. I'm a retired San Diego police officer, and 25 years ago, I was exposed to a professional human trafficking ring in San Diego, where we arrested suspects involved in trafficking girls through a modeling agency, and then conned them into it, and then were sold for $20,000 a piece, and we're actually going to Turkey rather than Paris, where they thought they were going to do a photo shoot. That kind of opened my eyes as a guy that grew up in California that, wow, this, sophisticated country, and here we're selling our children. And it really woke me up. And so when I retired from the police department, we started a private school designed specifically for traffic victims. Our location is undisclosed. We've been helping kids for 25 years. We deal with domestic minors. We get these minors from Homeland Security and FBI. We provide witness protection for these girls and have had 100% success in prosecution. So the success in prosecution comes from training the girls and having them understand that they are safe and that they can testify without punitive. Like someone mentioned before, you have a girl in a courtroom that's 14 years old, and you have the slaveholder, pimp, and their family or gangbangers in the crowd. What girl's going to tell the truth? They're in fear. Some of the things I just want to share real quickly that's important is that these girls are so afraid of the slaveholders that they will insist on going back. And they don't call him their pimp. They call him their boyfriend. And so there's a when you play with the stats and you say, well, these people don't have pimps, every single girl that we rescued had a pimp. And every girl that they call going rogue, which is by yourself and without a pimp, was recruited shortly after trying to go independent. So it's, at least with minors, our experience has been they all have someone controlling them. It could be a relative or it could be a friend, but it's always someone controlling them and controlling the money. The thing I want to end with is that I see these girls on a day-to-day basis, And the trauma and the damage that's done is unbelievable. These girls have nightmares every night. They're traumatized. And for anyone to minimize this, it's just flat wrong.
Yeah.
We're dealing with it.
Could you do me a favor? And you said you had 100% success rate in getting people to testify.
And being successful in prosecution.
All right. So we can't get into all the things that you've done right now. But again, if you can talk with Tomasa, and we'd like to understand better what you've done and how you've been successful. And there may be or may not be legislation that come out of it, but we would like to know, because that is a major concern that we have as prosecution. So again, to talk to Tomasa and let's hear what it is you were able to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rachel West with the U.S. Prostitutes Collective. And I'm really glad that, finally in the California legislature, the differences are coming up. The difference between prostitution, which is consenting, that's the key word, consenting sex for money, and then trafficking, which is forced coercion and fraud, forcing people into labor. I mean, that's really important to distinguish. I mean, I also did want to say that the whole issue of pimping and pandering, is something that needs to be looked at clearer too, because we've helped women in cases, say a 23-year-old who tried to help a young woman on the streets who was in a terrible violent situation, and the two women started working together. The older woman, the 23-year-old, was done for pimping and pandering and facing sex offender status. So, when they have these huge anti-trafficking sweeps, which just sweep everybody off the streets and targeting sex workers, mainly women of color, black women, and immigrant women, are picked up for arrest in these huge trafficking sweeps. Who is really being picked up, and what is it about? And many of the women get deported as a result. When we look back on the war on drugs, and seeing the devastating consequences of it on the particularly low-income communities of color, that is who is being targeted in these massive anti-trafficking sweeps. In the under the guise of rescuing children involved in trafficking. But I think we really have to look carefully at how anti-trafficking, these huge raids and sweeps are impacting Black and immigrant communities, because, in the San Francisco human trafficking report that some people have mentioned, so, there were some statistics that really stood out.
Look,
Can I just finish? 48%.
Okay, first of all, I've read the report and I agree with you. So I will say that the statistics there were pretty awful. If you could sum up in the next 30 seconds.
48% of traffickers were black, and 37% of the survivors were black in San Francisco, which has 5.6% of the population. My point is, how is the anti-trafficking enforcement targeting the black community?
Thank you.
Hi. My name's Kate Horton. I'm a PhD candidate in health policy in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at University of California, San Francisco. I'm currently writing up my PhD dissertation research, which is on sex work and policy. And my research explores the qualitative experiences of sex workers directly impacted by laws and policy approaches that we're talking about here today. So I wanted to share a tiny bit of some preliminary findings from my work that relate to the policy issues of conflating sex work with human trafficking from the perspective of the health and human rights of sex workers. And I've been doing in-depth, extensive interviews with sex workers in the Bay Area. Excuse me. So we already know there's a lot of previous research that we've heard some of a little about, that criminalizing prostitution drives sex work underground where it's less safe. Specifically, human trafficking legislation that doesn't adequately differentiate between sex work and human trafficking impacts a lot of safety measures used by sex workers. So sex workers in my research cite working together as a primary safety measure, but when people are fearful of being arrested or charged under human trafficking laws, the stakes are extremely high. sex workers are increasingly reluctant to work together for safety for fear of being arrested under human trafficking laws. Working together for safety means having someone know where you are and where and when you should return to. So when you're faced with human trafficking legislation, the person who's looking out for you has great concerns about being reported, about reporting violence or coming forward as a witness of violence for fear of being arrested under human trafficking laws. So that obviously reinforces the need to separate trafficking from sex work in laws and policy. One other thing that I want to mention briefly is that participants in my research are largely more concerned and fearful of violence from law enforcement than violence from paying clients. We already heard that sting operations are driven by a human trafficking framework and the money behind that framework. And there's really a need to understand how this conflation of trafficking with sex work is problematic, as it's understood to actually perpetuate violence rather than protect people from it.
I'm going to ask you to do some more work. Would very much like you to send us a summary of your research. And again, Tomasa there would be the right, I've got her doing a lot of work, of follow-up work. And I really want to understand what you found because, and I'm hoping that it is a study where we can really rely on the numbers. The San Francisco report someone mentioned, again, the statistics were not particularly good. I hope that they would be good from your study and understand where we may be making mistakes in what we're doing today. So we definitely want to hear from you some more, and please work with Tomasa to get us more information. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Good afternoon. We saw each other in Hayward, and I want to thank you, Assemblyman Quirk, for taking the time to address this issue and reach out to the sex work community. My name is Starchild. I'm from San Francisco. I am an active current sex worker, and I was also coercively trafficked, although fortunately only briefly. I'm sad to say that it actually happened at the hands of law enforcement. I was entrapped and set up in a sting operation by police officers dishonestly posing as clients working for the city of Fremont. I was kidnapped by them and stuck in a cage for about 24 hours, 2 different jail locations. And subsequently, before I was able to pursue this to jury trial and ultimately get acquitted, it cost me, 2 years of time and about $5,000, and never got so much as an apology from the city of Fremont or the state of California for having these prostitution laws that criminalize me for trying to earn an honest living. I agree with everything that's been said here today about the conflation of human trafficking with consensual prostitution. I see this, we saw this with Prop 35, it continues. The old moralistic forces that used to shame prostitutes and say, you're bad people, you're fallen women, etc. And people like me as a male sex worker are kind of invisible in this narrative. They want to pretend it's all about victimization of women. They realize that argument doesn't really sell anymore. So now they're turning to victimizing our clients, victimizing our support personnel, demonizing them as exploiters and abusers and traffickers, and using terms like human slavery and this sort of thing. And of course it's a real phenomenon, it's always existed. But it's a very small percentage, and the fact that they don't have the numbers are all fuzzy, is ample evidence of this. And until that problem gets fixed and this conflation is firmly addressed and sorted out, I think it would be a mistake to throw any more resources at this problem, because as your colleague was saying, it may be doing more harm than good in the unintended consequences of what you do. And I wanted to specifically mention the U and T visas. DA O'Malley was saying that her office was very aggressive, she used that term, and also very successful at getting these visas for people she called trafficking survivors. And she and others also mentioned benefits and refugee status and other things available to survivors. And the problem is you get more of what you incentivize. People come to this country,
If you could sum up in about 20 seconds.
People come for economic opportunities, and they are trying to pay back the people that smuggled them or helped them, in many cases, survive, save their lives from crossing the desert on their own, etc. And they come and they work in a massage parlor to pay back this money, but then the massage parlor gets raided, and they face a choice of saying, yes, I'm here voluntarily working as a prostitute, paying back my smugglers. Then they get arrested and deported and everything else. Or, they've been incentivized now, they can say, oh, I'm a victim, I'm being held here against my will, sexual slavery, human trafficking, etc. And then they can be eligible to stay in the country, get all kinds of official assistance and help. And so the official numbers, as small as they are, I think even those small numbers are being inflated by how people are being incentivized. And that's a key fact.
Thank you. I think we get your point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Assemblymember Kirk and members of the committee. My name is Sonia Stiers. I'm Government Relations for the Salvation Army's work in California. And we just want to thank you for bringing increased awareness to the current reality of human trafficking within the state of California. The Salvation Army also appreciates the opportunity to be present today to not only hear the informative reports, but also to encourage continued considerations of solutions and provisions for supports for survivors. The Salvation Army is an international organization within over 127 countries, and we've identified human trafficking as a global problem that requires prioritization and increased focus, such as you're doing here. Within the state of California, the Salvation Army currently has 2 programs in Southern California and are moving toward providing representatives and support throughout the state. We are collaborative and believe in the need for a collaborative approach in addressing the issue and working towards solutions. We encourage the committee to consider cross-committee conversations, not only with the budget, but also, as we've heard today, with education, with housing, community development, and human services. With me today is Priscilla Santos, who is the Program Director of the Salvation Army's Anti-Trafficking Services Program based in Anaheim.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. Since 2009, our Orange County program has served over 150 survivors. 60% of these have been labor trafficking survivors, 40% of these have been sex trafficking survivors, and at least 10% of all of the cases we've served involved members of the LGBTQ community. This population is even more vulnerable because of the stigma associated with identifying as part of the LGBT community. In our experience, the Salvation Army sees the need for increased comprehensive resources, early identification, intervention, and supports of vulnerable families and family systems, more affordable housing with proper staff, including advocacy and case managers that include all emergency, short-term, and long-term housing. As mentioned by many people here today, improved data collection, and an increased awareness and discussion of labor trafficking victims. We are seeing success in our program because we are taking a holistic and trauma-informed approach in recovery and integration. We have social support and housing services through our faith-based partners and our early efforts to identify victims. But most importantly, and one of the most important parts of our program is our effort to be survivor-informed, providing voices to actually survivors that are a part of our program and that graduate from our program. Realizing that each human being is precious, we realize that human trafficking survivors are more than their story. They're more than their tragic story. With the right care, they can be empowered to overcome the label of victim, which is so stigmatizing, and become survivors and an active part of their community and finding hope. The Salvation Army is eager to be a part of future conversations on this critical topic. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for your great work, and we will certainly do, again, Tomasa is the point person, and as we come up with suggested legislation, we'd certainly like to get any ideas you have and then try out ideas that we have on you. So I really appreciate your being here and the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Now, last, and by the way, I think this has been excellent public testimony, and I really appreciate Member Jones-Sawyer and Member Lopez staying through this. You don't always get people staying, so we should be very pleased that these elected officials have been willing to be educated by the public. So go ahead.
Hi, is the volume okay? My name is Melanie Dante. I'm here with the Erotic Service Providers and also on behalf of the Sex Workers Outreach Project. I want to thank you very much, Assemblyman Quirk, for your detail to data. It is much appreciated. My statement is based on the conversation today and was not predetermined. And I would just want to share, I am defined as, by federal definition, as a former victim of U.S. domestic minor sex trafficking. I was kicked out of my house at 13 and brought back, and then permanently at 16. I worked in different aspects of the sex trade, eventually becoming what would be defined as a migrant sex worker within the U.S. and crossed the country numerous times in what was defined as the old circuit system. So though I'm from Philadelphia, I'm here because of the fact that I did work in California quite a bit, and I have a lot of associations here. That said, I also, in the early 90s, went to federal law enforcement after experiencing and witnessing what I defined as slavery, in that we were beaten up, we refused our pay, we were given bad checks, and we were told that that's just the way it was. My experience in the early 1990s with federal law enforcement would not bring me to go to law enforcement at this point in time. I came out last December because the current militarization of the way that law enforcement is working with sex workers in the sex trafficking construct is dangerous. And for those of us that thought that we had put that danger behind us by acclimating into mainstream society, we have been left without any services available to us, because for those identifying as consensual adult workers, we are not in the correct definition to receive any services or protection. So my entire life, which I have worked very hard to construct into a very safe and small normal life, has been completely blown out of the water with no resources available. And organizations like the Salvation Army and other faith-based groups, they are wonderful and they have a definite place. They do not allow for people like me to stay there, and they do not offer us any services. For those of us that identify as anyone who has experienced consensual sex work, or for those of us who are no other consensual sex workers, we are not allowed to integrate with those who are defined as current sex trafficking victims. These are problems that we have no voice to address, and the only people who work with us are the sex worker advocacy organizations, which are completely unfunded except for their sex work. These are all problems that we don't have voice for, and we are trying to find places where we can discuss that.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, what services do you particularly need that you would like to have that you're not getting?
I lost property in 2012 and went back to sex work in the midst of the sex trafficking advancement. And so with that, sex work is the only income that I have. Though I have a master's degree in technical writing, all of my mainstream income was earned as an unlicensed caregiver. And I have no vocational retraining. I have no educational scholarship possibilities. I have no employers that will work with sex workers or sex trafficking victims. And these
I'm trying to understand. You don't want to continue as a sex worker and you need help? Is that what you're saying? Or
well, there are no exit strategies, and if for those of us that might want to work, we can't in the current system with the way with Operation Cross Country being a really good example. So if I wanted to exit right now and become vocationally able to work within a mainstream construct, that's not available. And I'm not the only person experiencing that.
Okay, I don't understand why it isn't. Why couldn't you go back to technical writing? I'm trying to understand.
Well, with that, I have the degree, but who is hiring me as a known sex worker?
Oh, I see. So you have something on your record?
No, I don't. But I've had to come out as a result of the way that all of this has become so public.
Okay. All right. Well,
it put me
if you can, again, perhaps talk with us some more and we can understand better. You could also talk to their number of providers of services who I think would be glad to talk to you.
I would love to hear about any educational scholarship and housing vouchers that they have available. That would be great.
All right. So particularly some of the providers here of services, if you could talk with this young lady and see if we can get her some help.
I'll give
and
you
then
feedback on
also
that.
more generally, think about how her example, how common it is, and whether there's something we could or should be doing. So thank you very much for your testimony.
You're
It was
welcome.
very important. So again, there's just been excellent testimony here. Do you want to say anything to wrap up? All right. Well, I have learned a whole lot, and I think we'll be able to do a much better job in this next year. If there are no other concerns, last chance. Okay, I'm calling the meeting to an end.